Collapse file number 4. Subject: Wirecard, the pride of German finance. Reported cash in the bank, 1.9 billion euros. Cash actually in the bank, 0. Members of Germany's elite stock index ever to go bankrupt before this one, none. Cause of death: a fortune that everyone could see on paper, sitting in 2 bank accounts that did not exist. This is the collapse files. For 2 decades, Wirecard was the company Germany wanted to believe in. A nation famous for old industry, cars, chemicals, machine tools, finally had a technology champion. A homegrown digital payments giant to rival Silicon Valley. And at its peak, the market said it was worth around 24 billion euros, more for a moment than Deutsche Bank itself. The business sounded modern and unstoppable. Every time someone tapped a card or paid online, a company like Wirecard could sit invisibly in the middle, processing the payment and taking a tiny sliver. Multiply that sliver by billions of transactions, and you have a money machine. That, at least, was the story. And Germany bought it completely. At the center stood the chief executive, Markus Braun. An Austrian, a major shareholder in his own company, rarely seen without a black turtleneck, the uniform of a man who wanted to be his industry's Steve Jobs. Under Braun, Wirecard's share price climbed and climbed. And in September of 2018, it reached the summit. Wirecard was promoted into the DAX, the index of Germany's 30 most important public companies. To make room, it pushed out Commerzbank, a lender founded in 1870. A scrappy fintech had just displaced a 150-year-old bank from the heart of the German establishment. The champion had arrived. The pension funds piled in. But here is the first thing the file flags, because the warning was not whispered. It was printed in one of the most respected newspapers on earth for years. Starting back in 2015, the Financial Times, led by a reporter named Dan McCrum, ran a series it called The House of Wirecard. Its message was blunt. The numbers did not add up. Then, in January of 2019, it got specific. Drawing on an internal investigation and a whistleblower inside Wirecard's Asian operation, the FT alleged forged contracts and something called round-tripping, money shuffled in circles to look like real sales. The stock fell hard. And now, the German authorities did something extraordinary. They went after the journalists. Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, did not raid Wirecard. Instead, it banned investors from betting against Wirecard stock, the only time it has ever done that for a single company, and it filed a criminal complaint against the Financial Times reporters for suspected market manipulation. The watchdog had looked at a fire and arrested the people shouting the alarm. And that is this file's first twist. At Night Capital, the warning sat in 97 unread emails. At Bearings, an audit named the danger a year early. At Archegos, the danger was invisible by design. Here the warning was the opposite of hidden. It was on the front page, again and again, and the official response was to protect the accused and investigate the messenger. So how did the fraud actually work? The heart of it was a business Wirecard called third-party acquiring. In countries where Wirecard did not hold the right licenses, across Asia and the Middle East, it claimed to outsource payment processing to local partner firms who passed back a share of the profits. It was opaque, it was offshore, and it was enormous. This third-party business was, on paper, the crown jewel. It accounted for roughly half of all the revenue Wirecard reported and the lion's share of its profit. There was just one problem, which investigators would later confirm. Huge portions of it were fictional, invented merchants, forged contracts, and money sent in circles to imitate the look of a thriving trade. But fake profits were only half the trick. If a company is inventing earnings, where does it pretend to keep the cash? Wirecard's answer was to say the money sat safely in escrow, in trustee accounts, far away, held on its behalf by a partner in Asia. By 2020, those accounts supposedly held 1.9 billion euros, and that brings us to Exhibit C. Exhibit C is a bank confirmation letter. In an audit, it is the most ordinary thing in the world. A letter from a bank confirming that yes, this customer's money is really here. Wirecard produced such letters, naming 2 of the largest banks in the Philippines, BDO and the Bank of the Philippine Islands, with real-looking officer signatures and a balance of nearly 2 billion euros. the letters were forgeries. And here is the detail that should never have been possible. For roughly 3 years, Wirecard's auditor, the global firm Ernst & Young, did not contact those banks directly to confirm the cash. It relied instead on documents passed along through the trustee and the company itself. One senior auditor told the Financial Times that getting an independent confirmation from the bank is, in his words, day one training at audit school. The loop was never closed. The forged letters were never checked against their source. So when reporters and investigators finally asked the obvious question, has anyone simply called the banks? The answer came back like a trapdoor opening. One of the Singapore banks said it had received no such query from the auditors for 3 straight years. By 2020, the pressure was unbearable. To clear its name once and for all, Wirecard hired a second firm, KPMG, to perform a special audit to prove the doubters wrong. It was meant to be vindication. On the 28th of April, 2020, KPMG delivered its verdict, and it was a catastrophe. KPMG said it could not verify the bulk of Wirecard's profits from the third-party business, and it could not confirm that the cash in those trustee accounts actually existed. The company had commissioned an autopsy on a body it swore was alive, and the report came back unable to find a pulse. Now even the believers began to run. The end came in one brutal week, in June of 2020. On the 18th, Ernst & Young refused to sign off on the accounts. The confirmation letters for the 1.9 billion euros, they now said, were spurious. The 2 Philippine banks stated plainly that the documents were forged and that they had never held an account for Wirecard at all. On the 19th of June, as the company imploded, its chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek, vanished. The man who had run the mysterious Asian business boarded a private jet and flew east into Belarus. He has not been seen in public since. Marcus Braun, the chief executive in the Black Turtleneck, resigned that same day. On the 22nd of June, Wirecard admitted the unthinkable in writing. The 1.9 billion euros, it said, likely did not exist, not stolen, not moved, never there in the first place, a number typed onto forged letters, propping up a quarter of the company's own balance sheet. The next day, Marcus Braun was arrested. On the 25th of June, 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency, the first member of Germany's elite DAX index ever to go bankrupt. A company that days earlier had been called a national champion was now a crime scene. Shareholders lost almost the entire 24 billion euros it had once been worth. Creditor banks were left with a hole of around 3 billion more. The reckoning split in 2 directions. Marcus Braun was charged with fraud, breach of trust, and falsifying accounts. His trial opened in Munich in December of 2022, and it is still running. Braun denies everything. He insists he was a victim, not a mastermind, that others ran a secret fraud beneath him. As this file is sealed, no verdict has been delivered. And the other man, Jan Marsalek's flight did not end in Belarus. According to investigations by journalists and Western intelligence agencies, he surfaced in Moscow, living under a false name, and had for years been an agent working for Russian intelligence. The chief operating officer of Germany's proudest tech firm was, they allege, a spy. He remains a fugitive to this day. Sit with what that means. The man at the operational center of the largest accounting fraud in modern German history is not in a courtroom. He is, by the most credible accounts in Russia, beyond the reach of every warrant, a payments executive turned intelligence asset. The collapse did not just bankrupt a company, it tore open a hole into a different kind of story altogether. So what makes file number 4 different? At Night Capital, machines moved faster than the men watching them. At Bearings, one trader hid his losses. At Archegos, the fortune was invisible. Here, almost nothing was hidden at all. The fraud was reported in the press for 5 years. The auditors had only to make a phone call. The regulator had only to look. The catastrophe was not that the truth was unknowable. It was that an entire system, auditors, regulators, investors, a proud nation, chose for years to believe the comfortable story over the printed warning. The money was never there, and almost no one with the power to check ever picked up the phone to ask. 2 billion euros that existed only on forged paper, a champion that was half invention, a chief executive who says he was robbed, and a chief operating officer who became a ghost in Moscow. The warnings were never missing, only the will to read them. File number 4 is closed.